The Gospel of Nicodemus. Why does it scream forgery more than gospel? I want to answer this question. And in doing so, in this brief presentation, just look at the aspect of its dimension of how it fits into that term forgery. And forgery, I'm using as a term in reference for fabrication, in reference for work of art. This is a work of art. This is a fabrication. We can know this mostly because of its heavy reliance on the four Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, plus additional details that they don't have. Its history and inconsistency with history and other such that we're going to get into in this presentation. And the little details that this gospel has, that are not included in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. For example, we see the same trial, we see the same washing of the hands of Pilate, but we also get a sympathetic Pilate, an emotional Pilate, inconsistent with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and also with history. We get three new names that see Jesus ascending to heaven, inconsistent with Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Acts. We get a condemnation of Jesus needing to be crucified because he is breaking the Sabbath, inconsistent with Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Acts. We get a whole lot of new stuff within the Gospel of Nicodemus, including Joseph of Arimathea being imprisoned for placing Jesus into his own tomb, and then being miraculously released from prison by the Jesus character himself. So there is a lot that's going on in this gospel that is not familiar to the general observer, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and its deviation. And I know we like to think of Matthew being the thing that picks up where Mark left off, and Luke being the thing that where Matthew left off, and John being the thing where Matthew, Mark, and Luke left off. I know we like to think that, although that's not valid in any sense or that case. It seems like that's also what's going on here with the Gospel of Nicodemus. What Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Acts didn't pick up, Gospel of Nicodemus is reaffirming and making valid. Well, that's not the case, and we're going to see how that's not the case in this presentation, and how this literature is written specifically for an audience and for the government of that audience of that time, which is fourth century. John, the last of those, written around 90 to 100 AD, the Acts written sometime after, in the middle of that point. You have the Gospel of Nicodemus now coming fourth century. Fourth century written, third, fourth century written in Greek, translated into Latin, and then you get into the Middle Ages, and in the Middle Ages, that's when it takes on a force of its own, and it becomes more valid now because maybe it's translated into English, and what's translated into English is now more valid. I don't know, but it's not valid. And we're going to go through this presentation and look at the very specific political and religious points that show the forgery. And I'm using again the term forgery to show that it is a work of art built upon a work of art and a fabrication for a specific political and religious agenda. Now, just to introduce this gospel, the Gospel of Nicodemus is a later Christian text that includes the Acts of Pilate, claims to provide an account of Jesus' trial and crucifixion. It's not considered a historical document, but rather a theological narrative, and that's another point of why it is to be considered a forgery due to the elements of its apologetics. Uh, so the Gospel of Nicodemus was created to revise and rehabilitate the image of Pontius Pilate, serves as a Christian forgery with theological and political motives. Its aim was to reshape early Christian memory and identity. We will see how that really happens. This presentation, it aims to critically examine the Gospel of Nicodemus. It highlights the text's role as a Christian forgery rather than a historical account. A Christian forgery rather than a historical account. We will analyze its theological and political narrative or the agenda backing it. And we will look at how the influence of such precipitates the impression that one now has on Pontius Pilate, on the Christian theory, the role it plays in reshaping the memory of the trial and crucifixion of Jesus, and how the text contributes to the development of early Christian identity and theology. Now, the Gospel of Nicodemus emerged centuries after the canonical Gospels were written. Its creation is likely due to a response of the times, the debate between Christians and Jews at that time. There is a need clearly from this document as you're going through it to defend Christian beliefs and beliefs that are not necessarily those from the age of the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John era. The dispute over Jesus' trial, the tensions between the Christians and the Jews during its creation. It's aimed to reiterate the narrative, to support a little bit of the former Christian perspectives, but new and arising Christian perspectives, creating a new, supposedly historical narrative for the Jesus character, the Jewish leadership, the Sanhedrin, Pontius Pilate, and the Roman government. And this contributes to, still and to this day, this document to the theological debates going on about the role of the Christian perspective concerning the crucifixion of Jesus and concerning how the characters therein are to be viewed. Now, in the Gospel of Nicodemus, there is a section, the Acts of Pilate. It's not really sectioned, it's just weaved throughout. The Acts of Pilate is a section within the Gospel of Nicodemus focusing on Pontius Pilate's role in the trial of Jesus. It provides a detailed account of Pilate's interactions with certain figures. Now, it highlights Pilate's dealings with Jewish leaders and Roman authorities, looking into the dynamics and tensions that are going on during that trial and the interactions that Pilate is having with both his thoughts, his authority position, being one with Rome, and also the Jewish leadership. Now, this is supposed to be a literary construct for the purpose of showing the kind of dimension that Pilate was in and easing off of him the pressure of the sentence. This causes Pilate to be painted in a more sympathetic light. It emphasizes his reluctance in condemning Jesus, and the portrayal of such contrasts very starkly with what we know from Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and not just there, but also in history concerning Pilate's character. This alters the traditional understanding of the Pilate character himself. Once he is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he is a fiction character because even then his dealings are not as they are written, for example, in the records of Philo, supposed to be more historical, Philo. By the time you get to Gospel of Nicodemus, his character is more fiction. And the events and the senses and the spirit surrounding him, it distorts how history is showing him so that we can see that there's actually an agenda going on here with this narrative and why it is written for the purpose of influence. These authors are influencers of the Christian religion. Now, the sympathetic Pilate is definitely new in the Gospel of Nicodemus. Pilate is portrayed as a sympathetic and even pious individual. This depiction contrasts with earlier gospel narratives and historical record. The text suggests that Pilate was unjustly pressured into sentencing Jesus. Imagine that. Pilate, historically written as a cruel individual, cruel, sympathetic, and struggling to sentence somebody calling themselves the Son of God, that everyone at that time knows Rome is God. Imagine that, sympathetic. Minimizes Pilate's culpability in the condemnation of Jesus. Pilate is cast as a figure caught between conflicting demands. Now, historical and gospel depictions of Pilate. Earlier gospel narratives and historical records present Pilate as a Roman governor depicted as responsible for Jesus' condemnation. These accounts don't portray Pilate sympathetic or pious at all. They emphasize his role in the execution directly. This contrasts, again, starkly with the Gospel of Nicodemus. The revisionist work of art that the Gospel of Nicodemus is brilliant because the fabric of its work, the elements of the trial and crucifixion, it gives new names it gives names to people that see Jesus rise, the people on the cross, new names to the people that he healed. There's a lot of newness to this and a lot of new elements to the characters that are in it to shift the blame away from the actors, Roman authorities. The revision, therefore, is undermining the historical record, the quote unquote, because the Gospels are supposed to be historical. They're written with the same sort of Greek linguistic context as is, for example, Dionysus. And Dionysus, when you read it, or if you were alive back then when it was there, It was to be written in a sense to convince the readers that it was real, even though it was mythological and never happened. The Gospels are written with the same fabric. They're supposed to be real. It never really happened. But this is the Gospel of Nicodemus going against the quote unquote historical record of the Gospels to reframe things in a way that makes the shift evident. Pilate's role to appear more favorable, altering the perception of his involvement with the crucifixion. The theological aims are changed rather than accuracy historically as in the type of writing that's there being maintained. So the distortions in the Gospel of Nicodemus, they align with Christian apologetics. They replace the historical record with a narrative supporting the theological goals of that document. This approach prioritizes religious aims over what is supposed to be actual according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Acts, therefore undermining the records of the gospel narratives, building upon and replacing former accounts with a narrative serving its own general purposes. So this distortion impacts the reliability, not of the Gospel of Nicodemus, but of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And again, I began by saying that when we read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there is a general belief that what Mark didn't get, Matthew picked up. Matthew didn't get, Luke picked up. What Luke didn't get, what Matthew and Mark didn't get, John picks up. That's not the case in any of those. And especially here, there is a great distortion that's absolutely necessary if we are situating ourselves in the time that this document, Gospel of Nicodemus, is written in the 4th century. There are new beliefs, there is a new opinion, and there are new debates going on between the general religion of the Christian and the general religion of the then Hellenistic Jew. So this then introduces apologetics, defending Christian beliefs through its narrative, new Christian beliefs through its narrative, legitimizing those beliefs by addressing criticisms from Jewish and Roman perspectives. Now, this is a defense for a foundation against claims at that point in time in that debate against the Christian theory. Therefore, the narrative then seeks to justify the innocence of Jesus, portray him in a righteous and undeserving light for his trial, accusation, and crucifixion, reinforcing the kind of moral integrity of the Jesus character within this theological framework. Now, all of that you don't have to get or pick up on in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's not that emphasized, but here, in a way, its machination is. Pilate here is then, due to his reluctance, depicted as a participant. He's a participant, not the authority. He is simply a participant, and a forced participant at that, which makes the details of his authority over this crucifixion more complex. And this is done to highlight the tension between political authority and moral responsibility of the leadership. You need a document painting the Roman authority, the Roman authorities, the Roman government as being yet human, as yet embodying the same philosophical principles of the religion that it wants to set in place. Now, this is 4th century. By the time we get to 508 AD, the pagan religion of Rome will be taken out of the government. And by the time we get to 538 AD, the pagan Roman religion will marry the Christian theory to become papal Rome. And everything that's taking place that leads up to those events, it's from literature like this, where the audience can gain sympathy from literature for the Roman government and for how it is now catering to a specific religious audience and a religious political audience to set the stage for later acceptance of a new pagan Roman religion. That's the lasting legacy of this, and it's really interesting. And the apologetics for this are the main source for this and every other forgery gospel thing that should come after, along with those apocrypha stuff. They're simply just leading up the audience to have faith in a government supporting their new pagan Roman religion. Now, all of this challenges the validity when you take into consideration the age of which this was written, the environment, and the nature for the purpose, political and religious, it kind of invalidates this Gospel of Nicodemus as being anything than propaganda, and it is. Now, the Gospel of Nicodemus, minimizing Roman culpability in its document, portraying the Roman governor's responsibility, Pilate, in a way that shifts the focus away from Roman actions onto the external. So, who's the external? That's the Sanhedrin. Instead of blaming Roman authorities, the Jewish leaders are now the ones to blame. The shift now absolves the Roman government of direct culpability in Jesus' crucifixion and reframes the trial as a situation manipulated by the Jewish leaders rather than a decision by the Roman authority. So then this trial now, it philosophically becomes a case of injustice, a miscarriage of injustice imposed on Pilate. I will wash my hands. Well, there in the Gospel of Nicodemus, building up this political point of what it means to wash the hands, and they're adding emotional elements to it, static elements to it, to shift the cause, to shift the necessity of this thing away from the ones that are behind it. It reframes the Roman governor Pilate as a reluctant participant in the sentencing, emphasizing external pressures in the decision making process. It's interesting. Yet all of that contradicts with the historical context of what we know. The established Roman historical records regarding Pilate's actions and governance are contradicted by this gospel. Historical evidence depicts Pilate as a firm and often harsh governor. This portrayal contrasts sharply with the Gospel of Nicodemus, which presents him as hesitant, sympathetic, not realistic. These contradictions highlight the text's departure from historical accuracy, prioritizing theological and political objectives over historical fidelity, reshaping Pilate's character to align with its narrative or literary goals, diverging from the Roman historical accounts, reframing Pilate's role to fit a theological and a new building theological framework. It's highlighting the focus on storytelling rather than maintaining what's already written. Why are you putting so many new things in, fourth century authors of the Christian theory, for a purpose of what? Why not remain consistent with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Why are so many new details given, details that are not really known at the fourth century because there's nothing written about these characters, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, in world history because they're not world history characters. This isn't world history literature. So many new things being developed. Why? Why is it necessary? Why do this? Well, we have to go back to the age and understand the age in contrast to the statement that is going on in the debate surrounding Christianity or the Christian theory and the Jewish theory. The Gospel of Nicodemus, in touching on the Jewish historical context, it diverges from the established Jewish historical accounts. The discrepancies show a difference of what contributes to a distorted understanding of Jewish roles in the historical events at this point in time. Jewish authorities, they're depicted as the primary instigators in the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. This intensifies the negative stereotypes about the Jewish communities, such as what we even still have today of their controlling government for the purpose of media, for the purpose of music, for the purpose of fashion, for the purpose of religion, for the purpose of what we ingest. These things are these thought processes are still continuing up until this time, and the propaganda beginning we can see in this document. So the Jewish historical context is altered for the purpose of pushing a new context or making innocent the kind of context that the authors really want to make innocent. So the tone of this narrative, Christian propaganda, plain and simple. It employs a narrative style that serves as Christian propaganda. The style prioritizes theological messaging over objective historical reporting, using dramatic and symbolic elements to convey its messages, highlighting Pilate's innocence in the events surrounding Jesus. This deliberate effort to shape perceptions, it reflects a focus on influence rather than what may have stayed factual according to what is written. Not talking about what is factual according to reality, talking about what is factual according to what is written, deviating from that willingly, symbolically. emphasizing the innocence of the Jesus character to reinforce a theological message. These are, you can see the tools being used to go beyond the surface for another surface, to resurrect another surface for the purpose of an agenda, for the purpose of persuading audience rather than allowing the audience to build up its confidence from what already exists. Now, the Gospel of Nicodemus serves as a tool for propaganda, legitimizing the Christian religion within the Roman Empire. It portrays Pilate in this manner that is more positive. It minimizes the Roman guilt of the crucifixion. It's doing this just to align the religion with Roman imperial authority. Which we sort of get when we go into the book of Romans with Paul, who kind of is wanting to back the Roman authority by saying, hey, listen, all that are set in position are of God. You do not want to disrespect who are in position, because you would be disrespecting God. You take that and then you go into the book of Acts, where it is highlighted those that hazarded their life and put their life in jeopardy for the Lord Jesus Christ. More blessings were given to them. There's this theme of continual sacrifice or martyrdom and sacrifice for government and for the Lord Jesus Christ. And by the time you get to the Gospel of Nicodemus, the Gospel of Nicodemus is bringing the two together in the characters that are there depicted and in the type of apologetics that it is presenting, all for the purpose of inevitably, eventually aligning the Christian theory with Roman political structure, allowing it to be and appear to be harmonious with Roman governance. It's for this time period. It's an interesting document for that purpose, not to serve any sort of you drawing closer to the living God, you drawing closer to the fact of what is going on in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in a realistic perspective, all for the purpose, this Gospel of Nicodemus, of drawing the audience to observe Roman government as a plea for compliance. Interesting. So the text reflects this shift of early Christian, therefore, memory. From a historical trial to a symbolic drama. The transition is reframing the events, therefore, and it moves away from the straight give it to you account Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John gives to serve communal and religious purposes that will benefit Rome in the end. The reframing of the Passion story, highlighting theological themes in a more emphatic way: the divinity of Jesus, resurrection over death, conflict between earthly and divine authority, persecution and martyrdom. These are new things. These are new beliefs that are servicing at the time. You go into Mark, Mark is going to tell you that, there's no such thing as believing in Jesus for anything, because the main character, the Jesus character, tells you, put your faith in God. Never says put your faith in me. But as the times go on and these communities bring out their community doctrines that we call gospels, the shift becomes apparent in what these communities believe. Mark doesn't believe what Matthew believes. Matthew doesn't ultimately believe what Luke believes. And John is just a belief on its own. By the time you get to the Gospel of Nicodemus, we're seeing these new things for community purposes, but the emphasis is more on Roman government and how the memory of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is supposed to serve the audience hearing these things for Roman government, to emphasize something that will bring the narrative into the life sphere of the person, into the secular life sphere of the person, to bridge the gap between their belief and how the perception of the Roman government is to be thought of and ultimately trusted in the end for carrying that new political religion. And this is again the necessity of reframing the Passion story to align with the theological needs of that government, and also of course, the Christian theory, but of that government. We need to have Pilate as a sympathetic figure. We need to shift focus away from Roman culpability. We need to address the concerns of the legitimacy of a Roman-dominated world that contains a Christian religion within it. We need to bridge that gap, and we also need to do what we also need to do is make a decisive end to how the Christian is being conflated with the Jew there, and how the Jew there is being conflated with the Christian. We need to make light what light is for our specific political agenda so that we can get things and track things moving to the point that they need to move for its acceptance in the Roman imperial courts. So I have here just highlighting that this is an identity that this Gospel of Nicodemus shapes within the Christian community for the purpose of a complex socio-political landscape, because it's needed to manipulate how the sociology of these folks are going to react when the time comes for them to accept the Christian theory as the new pagan Roman religion. And it will be. And you think about Revelation 13, that beast that ascends out of the earth, and the means that they use to get their position. The means that they use to get their positions, and it's not something that they are advertising. If you read that closely, there is an audience in Revelation 13 concerning that earth beast that is advocating for and pushing for the governance of that earth beast. And beast is a fundamental term representing pagan religious government, seeing that from the book of Daniel and also in the book of Revelation. It is the audience that needs to push for these things. And so literature like this is getting the audience to inevitably and eventually push for a new theme over the Roman government. And the authors here are setting up the landscape to show the public how empathetic they will be to them, how sympathetic they will be to their new deity, to their new dying and rising deity, Jesus, to make things acceptable at a later time. Now, the literary and theological motives behind this really, really evident. It defends the Christian doctrine against the external criticisms that are then in that age present. And you can tell, therefore, driven by literary motives to craft a compelling narrative that reinforces the beliefs of the Christian, revising the historical narrative, the supposedly historical narratives to align with the apologetics and theological perspectives of that time to promote events that support the climate of that faith's claim. So by addressing those theological concerns through its content, countering the criticisms in the debates of that age to affirm the validity of the Christian doctrine, the focus is to ensure that it aligns with the faith's core principles, sure, but there is a literary effort to engage readers, in a sense, to strengthen their faith through the influence of something that is to guide them toward affirming Roman authority, its safety, its innocence, and also its safety and its innocence, and how it will take care of their deity should it ever be employed in a position to do so. Now, compared with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospel of Nicodemus portrays Pilate as a more sympathetic figure. This depiction shifts blame away from Roman authorities. Such a portrayal contrasts with the canonical Gospels, which do not emphasize Pilate's sympathy. The difference underscores or highlights a revisionist approach in the Gospel of Nicodemus. Now, the Gospel of Nicodemus introduces apologetic elements which are absent from Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and even the Acts. And this inclusion reflects later Christian perspective, which is again why it is to be considered a forgery, highlighting the Gospel of Nicodemus as a revisionist doctrine. Its apologetic tone contrasting with the earlier texts and their characters and the messages that are conveyed through them. And so, how was this received and the influence of this text? Historically shaped Christian tradition and popular regard for it influenced perceptions of Pilate in the Passion narrative and also in the development of Christian identity. It reflects theological discussions and the utility of such, how they are to be or were addressed, and despite its questioned authenticity, it's continued to contribute to theological discourse, specifically on the aspect of Roman validity, for its care for it. Now, the Gospel of Nicodemus has faced scrutiny regarding its authenticity. Its historical reliability has been a subject of debate. These questions have not diminished its influence on Christian thought. Its role in shaping Christian identity is definitely evident as it contributes to understanding key elements of the crucifixion of Jesus, key elements that are not present in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Its impact is surrounding a bit of a controversial take due to that, and despite that happening, it's still doing its thing. Now you get to the academic side. Now this was just casual people, right? This is the reception and influence of this document upon casual people who want to believe that what Matthew left off, what Mark left off, Matthew picked up, what Luke left off, what Matthew left off, Luke picked up, and John just did something else that really wasn't seen, giving us scenes that were not, there in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but they were still there evident. Individuals like that. That's what this is for. You get to the academic side of things, and there's a more logical response to the Gospel of Nicodemus, where there is a critique of this document for its lack of authenticity and historical reliability. It's widely regarded in the academic circle as a later Christian forgery with theological distortions. This critique highlights the challenges in verifying the origins of early Christian texts. It's noted the Gospel of Nicodemus for its significant theological distortions, which distortions contribute to its classification as a later Christian forgery. Now, these elements do reflect the evolving debates around the then Christian theoretical religion, which, when looked at from that lens, there can be, I have two question marks here for value. There can be value in studying these things as they show how early Christian apologetics and the identity formation of such were given and driven for the purpose of a political agenda. So there's value in studying this for that. There's also value in the cultural and theological aspect of this contextually, as it shows how the culture is influencing both religion and politics at that time. So the development of early Christian thought and practices, looking at this document, there's value in this document for studying it in that light. But this document is not written, organized, and put together for the purpose of bringing its reader to anything closer for understanding what is going on within Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, or the Acts. Now, just to summarize, Gospel of Nicodemus, to summarize this presentation, is a later Christian forgery, aims at revising Pilate's image and reframing the Passion narrative. The text introduces theological apologetics, minimizes Roman culpability in the Passion narrative. The Gospel reflects a shift in early Christian memory and identity. This shift is shaped by theological motives. The Gospel of Nicodemus distorts earlier Gospel accounts, reframing the Passion narrative to align with its agenda. And these are our sources. And so hearing the questions about this Gospel of Nicodemus, hearing, the question of, is this really something valid? Yes, this is something valid. Why is this valid? No, this is really not that valid. Why is it not valid? Just want to give some answers here and to put, things into perspective for what we are to define and contextually define as valid, as forgery. Contextually, the definitive case for what is forgery is something that is written along the lines of propaganda. Propaganda enforcing religious and political agenda. And we can see how all of that plays into the Gospel of Nicodemus, and especially its dealings with the characters therein and the events that take place, events that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John do not mention, characters that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John do not mention, scenes that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John do not mention, a way of swaying and persuading that of a literary tool and tactic that the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not employ. This is not a document that is written to engage the individual with anything concerning what is going on there, but this is a document that is engaged for its time, for its place, for its space, for its environment, for the purpose of a political and religious agenda to bring the audience home to Rome, to bring the Christian theoretical audience, the audience of the Christian theory, audience of the Christian religion, home to Rome.